This is our first podcast called Bring It Here. Your hosts are myself, Norm Jennings, and
Jen Jennings, his wife.
We are very excited just to bring you different content that makes much of Jesus. Today, we want to introduce ourselves to you. We want to introduce the ministry that's behind Bring It Here to you. So the first thing I would like to ask is, how do you feel being behind a microphone in a podcast? Because you've never done that before.
No, I haven't, and it's a little on the frightening side, and I'm not really much of a talker anyway, and so having not something to read in front of me is a little bit foreign. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how we met?
Oh, okay. So we were living in Ames, Iowa. I was an engineer at the time, and Jen was just finishing up with her schooling, and we met through some friends. Both of us really felt we needed to be together. As we got to know each other, I got to watch her coach soccer, watch her coach a team of, how old were those kiddos? Do you remember?
I believe they were around 10, so it was either 10 and under or the 12 and under. It was one of those two.
Okay. And, that day I just saw somebody that was filled with patience, and I saw somebody that was just filled with joy, having fun, getting these kids to understand the game more and just enjoy it. And that really attracted me to you. And then we had some other fun things when we were dating early on. We used to get together with groups and do things. Do you remember some of those things?
Played volleyball. Remember that we did that often, and a little softball. You definitely did motocross and rode your bike quite a bit, and also coached wrestling. So with young, I think they were little scrappers, little elementary school kids, and I don't remember it being middle or high, but definitely with the Ames Club. Go Cyclones.
Couldn't avoid getting that plug in there, could you? So then it's easy to say that we fell in love with each other. Mm-hmm. We got married. We enjoyed another 5 or so years there in Ames, Iowa. One of my favorite memories during that time was just being a youth leader with you. We both felt that we were way over our heads, but we got to come alongside the high school youth. What are some of the things you remember from that time?
Well, since we were in the first few years of our marriage and I had just had a little girl, or we had just had our first baby, I don't remember a whole lot other than snippets of sardines in the big church that was very dark and had lots of wood and creaked a lot, so it was kind of scary. And then I also remembered a camping trip that we went on where you were more involved with the kids doing things, and then our little girl and I kind of just hung back. But so those that weren't involved in different activities, we just kind of hung out and chatted and stuff like that. But so those are two of the main memories that I have of youth. So
yeah, that was an awesome time. Sardines, forgot about that. So then we got married and we had our first child in Ames, Iowa, and her name was Olivia. And then we transferred down to Orlando, Florida. Mm-hmm. We're in there for an entire year and a half. Mm-hmm. And Orlando, the blessing that came to us down there was...
My dad and brother and family were down there.
Okay.
So, well, and so was SeaWorld. That was so much fun.
SeaWorld was great. Yeah. That's definitely our favorite from Orlando. And then we had our son Reese down there. Did it bother you that we just, after a year and a half, we up and moved from Orlando?
Well, I was not very excited about coming back to the middle of Kansas, though it wouldn't be back for me. It would have been back for you. Mm-hmm. So I was not excited about where we were moving to, but I knew that the Lord was bringing us there for a specific reason. And so it didn't take all that long before I smiled again. So we landed into a great church, and I was at home with the kids at that time, and you started working with your dad, and we were able to go out there quite often and be outside and where you were working, and so that it actually was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then in Salina, after we got back here, We
had our youngest, Kate, and then we realized that we just needed to stop moving because that obviously was how we were multiplying.
Right.
Yeah.
Took us a while to figure that out.
Right,
But
yeah.
Yeah, each time we moved, then we had a kid, so we stopped moving. That
Yes.
makes sense. Okay, so then in Salina we came, and I was alongside my dad in business that he had started. I was the general manager, and then you were alongside of us, and we worked together for quite a few years. I'm sure they're going to hear a lot more of that story in future episodes, so we don't need to go deep into that. But I look back on that time, and I just talked to a man this morning, and we had 3 young kids, and you're working hard because you're trying to get things established in life. And we were going to church, and we were just doing things together. It didn't seem like we were living out the type of marriage that we should have. Does that sound right?
Yeah. In fact, it didn't take very long after we moved to Salina that for me to kind of want to help out with the business with you and your dad. And so as I stepped in to just help, honestly, it was just to help, and brought our youngest one with us who was itty bitty at the time. Then I just kind of got sucked into working more and more as they grew up. It was still very flexible because I could kind of create my own hours, and I was filling in some gaps and could make a schedule around the kids. But that just meant that the time for you and I was not as much quality or quantity of that time. And then it often got just pushed to the side because there were other obligations now. And so.
Yeah. Okay. For the record, that's kind of how I remember it as well. And then there was just one Sunday where one of the pastors in our church preached a sermon to you and I that hit home because we weren't ready to get divorced, but we were feeling like we were pulled at both ends, that we didn't have time, that we were spending together, that we were running with the kids' things, we had work to do, and yes, we were going to church, but it just didn't seem like we were living life out right. And so after that pastor spoke the sermon, I remember that day where like you and I both afterwards said,
I bet we could go and talk to him.
Yeah.
And so we did and spent some time with him. And it cracked me up because he talked about him and his wife and the struggles that they had early in their marriage, and that they went and saw a man named Ron in Nebraska. And he's like, you probably don't need something like that. It was great to be able to just really spend some time with him and through the power of the Holy Spirit and with the Lord, just really finding out the whys behind what was driving us crazy about each other, why we would do certain things when we were in conflict, and it would pour fuel on the conflict as opposed to one of us being able to resolve it. And so that little glimmer of hope was what we needed. And so we had to wait a few weeks before we were able to get up there after we had made contact with him, made arrangements for the kids to stay where we were. And then we went up there to where Ron was, stayed in a bed and breakfast, and we spent 3 days with him. Obviously, it changed the course of our kids' lives.
And I remember being up there. Before we went, neither one of us wanted anybody really to find out that we were going to marriage counseling. I look back on it now. As soon as we left there, didn't we both feel like, oh man, we have got to let everybody know?
Yes, and everybody should go, whether you have got a good marriage or whether it's, you've really got some challenges or some problems. Unless you have that kind of intense counseling prior to marriage, like even before your engagement, it's not even like premarital counseling. It was just a deep dive into how the Lord bent me and how the Lord bent you, why the way that we were bent interacts with each other, and how that can potentially hurt unintentionally the other person. And so then what can we do instead? And how can we pray for the Lord to change those things and to soften some of those edges that we didn't really know that was there, but obviously felt the effects of?
And down the road, they'll get to understand some of those rough edges and some of those things. For any other thing in life, there's no cloak of shame that's put over it. You know, if somebody goes for a 1-week conference to learn how to be a better IT programmer of whatever they do their IT stuff in, right? Or a salesperson of big, heavy industrial equipment or farming. You know, all the time we know farming friends that go to conferences and they learn more about different
ag
seed varieties.
shows and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, but marriage. Yeah, if anybody says, yeah, we're going to go to marriage counseling, it's like, oh, no, there's something wrong with that. You and I realize this because of that experience, but I know the answer to this. I'm just still going to ask it. I grew up in church, okay? I did not have anybody that ever discipled me in what marriage and raising your kids up in the way they should go should look like.
Yeah.
Did you?
No.
You didn't have anybody that came along and discipled. So
No.
one of the first things that we definitely want our listeners to know is the heart behind At Stake Ministries, which is the ministry that this podcast, Bring It Here, is developed by. The heart of us is to disciple, right?
Yes.
And it's also to help people to find truth about the way that living in a fallen world that is full of things that are off kilter and are not perfect. We were definitely helped in understanding how those things impacted us and then loving each other through those things while we were able to not hurt each other all the time unknowingly. And so I think it was that in both of us coming away that really just said, we want to share that hope with people, right?
Yes.
And we want to just start investing in people. At that point in time, we weren't thinking, hey, let's just go into ministry and be counselors, right?
No, it was just sharing our story and just letting people know that there is a place that you can go. And it made a huge difference in our marriage and as parents, even as coworkers, since we worked together full time at that point. I was full time with you then. It was a game changer. And so that's what we did. We just would meet in living rooms or at church with people and just tell them a little bit about our story and what we learned. And usually they were headed up to go see Ron and had to wait that 6 or 8 weeks, kind of like what we did. And then it wasn't until the Lord kind of put you down for a season and then you felt the nudge that maybe this was going to be more of a full-time thing as opposed to the small business that we had. You want to say more about that?
Well, sometimes the Lord will really get a hold of you and place you in circumstances where all you can do is focus on His voice and get an understanding for what He wants you to do. So with me, I'm not a basketball player. As a matter of fact, right now is NCAA wrestling championship time of year, and I love wrestling. So basketball with our youth group really looked like basketball combined with UFC wrestling. One day after you and I I think we ran about 8 miles that day because we were training for a half marathon, right?
That's true,
Yep.
yes.
I just completely snapped my ACL. And so it was during the recovery of that, we really heard the Lord calling us into ministry. And that's the foundation of At Stake Ministries. In a future podcast, or you can also see it on our website, atstakeministries.com, it talks about our name and how the name At Stake Ministries came about. It was 2010 when we got a group of friends around us.
Yeah.
And we were feeling this calling and we wanted people to pray and discern and help us to figure it out. When we knew He was calling me into ministry, it was time to pray for you. And so what were your initial thoughts
Well,
about?
I was advocating for it to be a one-man ministry, literally, and figured that I would continue to work with the small business and just take care of the kids and all of that. But it didn't take very long for the Lord to show that that was not to be the case, and it would be both of us together. And so here we are.
And just like on this podcast being together, we're in the room for 3 days in a row working with people to give them the same blessing, right, that we received when we were with Ron.
Yeah.
And so we started out in Salina on a little corner of town where the traffic is busy and the horns can be rude. And we operated there from 2011 to 2016. And in 2015, we found the 80-acre estate that we're on now. Just how would you describe it to those who have not laid eyes on it?
Well, I don't even need to use my own words because when people come in, they come through the front door and then they look out because there's a slider on the other side that they can just look right out and see the rolling hills back there. And we hear, gosh, this is just beautiful out here. It's peaceful. I loved the drive coming in, the meandering way that it just carved through the acreage. And they may be anxious. They're anxious sometimes when they're coming in, but they're like, I know that I dropped some of that just being able to be on this property and seeing the trees or the turkeys or the deer or the birds or whatever the Lord has to display for them on their way in. And so the land is beautiful. We bought the property for the land. And the house was it was additive for sure, but it totally got remodeled. So where the land, we didn't have to do much to.
Yeah. And each step of the way, the Lord has just had us do different projects, walking trails with 3 prayer stations around the property where people can just go individually or as a couple and be with the Lord and work through some things. And we have on-site lodging. You can check us out again on either our app, which you can find on both of the App Store and the Play Store. Or you can also just see us on the web, and you can see a little bit of that for yourself. And so our team that we have now, I'll talk up the guy because I'm a guy, right? And then you can talk up the gal. And then we'll wrap up with just a few details of what the podcast is going to look like for our listeners. So Tyler McFadden is just a wonderful, wonderful friend. He joined us during the COVID times, and we have worked on lodging together, and we have worked on the grounds together. But more importantly, we just get to be alongside men and help them through the difficulties in life. We get to help married men that are young fathers see what God's calling is. Tyler is just a bit younger than me, very talented. He has a wife and he's got 4 kids, loves each one of them dearly. So that's a little bit about Tyler. Our listeners will hear from him on future podcasts, and let you introduce.
Yeah, we have Monica that joined us actually a year ago the other day. She is just a breath of fresh air, loves the Lord with all of her heart and soul and strength, and probably loves animals a pretty close second to that. She's got a mini donkey, a mini mule, and a horse that I'm sure she'll talk about when she comes and joins us. And then she loves people as well and has got just a heart for women, for youth, young ladies that are just struggling with their position or what the Lord has for them. She and Tyler will pair up together and work with couples, and then Norm and I also work with couples, and then Norm, like he said, works with individual males as well.
Good. Now for the podcast, when we were thinking about this, we were doing a little bit of joking about the old-fashioned days when there were call-in radio shows. Now that was live. This is not going to be live. We thought we want to share things that we share with people all the time out here, and we want to do that really as answers to questions. So we're saying bring your questions about life, about relationships, whatever, and we'll make those topics, and hopefully we'll cover those throughout the podcast. So we do have a spot on both the app and the web where you can just submit questions to us, and then we'll pull them out of the little red wagon that we have sitting next to us, and we will talk about those on the show. We'll give you the reason for hope through intensive biblical counseling.
I want to say thank you for tuning in and choosing to listen, and we look forward to hearing from you what some of your questions might be, and engaging with you with future episodes.
Those future episodes are going to include topics about marriage, about how do we work this blended family together, how do I endure this boss that I have, just all sorts of questions. If they relate to relationships, right?
Yeah.
All they need to do is bring them here to us.
Yep.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.